Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the possibility that the NBA could be returning to play to finish out this season in some capacity. And there's been some new information coming out about this over the last couple of days, and I want to talk about that as well as my own thoughts on whether the league should return to play, how they could possibly do it, and whether or not it's actually going to happen. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day. Okay, so I'm not sure if you guys have noticed, but we haven't had the NBA in like 2 months, or any of the other major American sports leagues for that matter. And one of the biggest problems with a potential return to play for the NBA was just the fact that there really didn't seem to be very much momentum towards that actually happening. Now, obviously, they're doing plenty of work behind the scenes, trying to come up with plans, trying to come up with contingencies, trying to make sure they can actually do this thing correctly and safely. But it was just weird that there wasn't very much information coming out, which made me very skeptical and pessimistic about the possibility that the league could come back. But over the last couple of days and over the last week or so, we've started to get some new information, not only about how this could happen, but how likely it actually is. So it begins with this Adam Silver-led conference call this past Friday. And at that time, things really didn't look good. The conference call just kind of generally outlined all of the challenges to returning to play this season, how the playoff format could be altered, where the games could be played, how it could be done safely, and how it would impact the economy of the league moving forward. And he also mentioned how the in-arena revenue of the league represented about 40% of the total revenue of the league, so it's going to have a pretty significant financial impact on the league to not finish out this season and the games that have already been missed to this point, because it's pretty much agreed upon at this point that they're not just going to resume the season where it was paused. The season is going to be altered in some way if it does come back at all. And it was also mentioned that there are a lot of logistical challenges that the league is going to have to overcome to return to play, and there's also going to be a handful of groups of people, the players, the owners, the league office, the Players Association, that are going to have to agree to how to deal with all these challenges. And so at the time, things really didn't look great. But then a few days ago, there was some optimism. There was a player-led conference call, guys like LeBron James, guys like Chris Paul that have a lot of pull within the league, and a whole bunch of these superstars, some of the most high-profile players in the league, banded together and basically came to the conclusion that as long as they can do it safely, they want to return to play this season, which sounds like an obvious statement, but it's a huge deal, because if for whatever reason the players came out and were like, you know what, this doesn't seem like that safe of an idea, it wasn't going to happen. If the players didn't want to play, then it wasn't going to happen. So at least we have that. There is positive momentum coming from the players saying that they do want to finish out this season, which shouldn't surprise anyone. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to return to play this year just because the players want to, but the fact that they said they wanted to means that it is at least a possibility moving forward. And then the last piece of news here, I guess, before we get into kind of my own personal thoughts on this, is that the league pointed out a timeline of around 2 to 4 weeks before they really need to make a decision. Somewhere around the first or second week in June, they need to have a plan. They need to know how they're going to proceed moving forward, and potentially earlier than that as well. So it was at least nice that we had a little bit of info, right? And we kind of knew what a timeline would look like. We knew that the players are going to need at least 30 days to train before the season would actually start. So if we are going to have an NBA season this year, it's going to be somewhere in the 6 to 7 to 8 week range from now before we get a resumption to play, assuming that is what actually happens. Now, given all of this new information, as we now transition into what I actually think is going to happen, should happen, all those things, I'm still not all that optimistic about the NBA returning to play this season. I made a video about this not very long ago, a couple of weeks ago, basically saying I don't think that it's going to happen. I don't see logistically how it can happen. And that's pretty much still where I am now, even given all of this new information. It's nice to know all of these things, but I still can't wrap my head around this concept that in a couple of weeks the NBA is going to announce that they're going to return to play. And what I keep coming back to is all the logistical challenges to returning to play, having to get all these different groups of people to agree on how to overcome those challenges, and the pretty tight timeline in which they have to do all those things. Now, I know that the league has been working behind the scenes for weeks and weeks and weeks since things shut down to try and figure out how to potentially move forward from here. So it's not like they're starting from scratch, but to get an actual coherent plan out there, procedures in place, and then get these people to agree to it within the next 2 to 4 weeks, I think is at the very least an unlikely scenario. Now, I know that there will be tremendous pressure from certain players and certain owners for the league to resume, and there's certainly plenty of financial incentive for the NBA to return. And if they could choose, I'm sure they would say, hey, I wish, if we could come up with a plan, let's come back tomorrow. Let's announce tomorrow that the league is gonna resume. I just don't think that that's all that likely, mostly given the timeline that they have for right now, without, having to impact next season, the start of next season, and how all of that is going to happen moving forward. Because remember, they still have to deal with how to run an offseason, free agency, the draft, how to get some kind of player evaluation structure in place for the draft, whether it's Zoom interviews or whatever. There's still a lot of things that they have to figure out outside of just finishing this season. And at some point, I feel like the decision is going to be made that it's better to move on from this and focus on the challenges moving forward rather than adding more on top of those other challenges by trying to resume this season. Now, having said that, let's just say that the NBA does decide to return to play and finish out this year. Here's how I think it's going to work. I think they're going to go right into the playoffs. I don't think there's any scenario in which teams that are not already in the playoffs as of right now play another regular season game in the 2019-20 season. If your team is not in the playoffs right now, I think your season is over. That's kind of where I'm at. I think that they have to just jump right into the playoffs using the standings that we currently have and using somewhere between 6 to 8 teams in each conference. Ideally, you would use 8 teams in each conference, keep the regular playoff structure. However, I don't know that's all that likely. So for me, I think that they're going to go 8 teams on each side using the current standings. Probably going to have to shorten the first and second round series to 3 or 5 games. And all of this, in my opinion, is more than likely going to happen in Disney World in Orlando. It just makes too much sense. All the connected parts that you have there. They have plenty of courts there, Wide World of Sports. They have the ability to set up cameras. They have all of the coordination between ESPN, ABC, and Disney. Then you can bring in TNT or whoever else is going to broadcast the playoffs, and I think that is the most likely scenario, and some kind of bubble situation where they have all the players, all the crew, all the coaching staff that they need at whatever minimalist level they can do it and still operate and function properly. They get there, they're in a bubble, they're tested, everybody is made sure that they're good to go, and then you have a procedure in place for if someone does end up testing positive, but otherwise you just play in this bubble there in Disney World, and I think that is pretty much the only safe way to do this moving forward. Now again, will that actually happen? I think that it's unlikely. I think that it's unlikely that the league looks at this situation and sees a way that the positives of this outweigh the negatives. When you're talking about all the negatives, having to figure out a way to make all this work, the potential safety risk to their players and to their coaches, the potential public perception issues of using tests that could be used elsewhere, even though the state of Florida seems like they're very excited about potentially having the NBA there, and the local health officials have said that they can use tests in this bubble scenario. There's still a public perception issue, even if logistically they could make it happen. And again, all the other issues that I continue to talk about, the timeline, having to get all these different people to agree to it, I don't think it's going to happen. I think the season is over. I think that we're going to go into the offseason. They're going to figure out a way to do a virtual draft, virtual free agency, because I think this thing is going to be in our lives for a good amount of time. And then moving forward, you also have to kind of figure out how you're going to run, a 30-team league next year and do some kind of regular season, depending on where the world is at that time, and figure out, how all that's going to look potentially with or without fans. So I don't mean to be overly pessimistic or negative here. I know that there's plenty of that already. I'm just being realistic in my own expectations and my own, thoughts about the situation, even given all this new information. As much as I want the league to come back, I wish it could come back tomorrow. Obviously, there's plenty of personal incentive given the fact that, everything that I do content-wise on this channel relates to the NBA, and when there's not actual games being played, it's a little bit difficult, right? And so I want to be optimistic about the situation, but I find it difficult to do so when you really consider all the challenges, logistically, public perception-wise, all those different things. I think it's possible that they can put together a plan involving Disney and shortened playoff series that could work in theory, but to actually put it into place in the timeline that they've been given and to get all these different people to agree to it, I think is incredibly unlikely, even given some recent optimism. And so that is still where I'm at. And I very much hope that I'm proven wrong, and that a couple of weeks from now, there's a plan in place to return to play and they're doing it safely and everything works out well. I just personally don't see that as a realistic possibility. And like I said, I hope I'm proven wrong, but that's just kind of where I'm at right now about the NBA potentially returning to play. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.